They weren't supposed to find it. Kyle adjusted the straps of his hiking bag and glanced back at Mason, who was hunched over the GPS. The late October wind howled through the forest canopy, tossing dead leaves across their boots. The sun was already beginning to dip behind the tree line, leaving long, spidery shadows that reached like claws across the mossy ground. "There's nothing here," Mason muttered, tapping the screen. "No trails. No markers. We've been walking off the grid for 2 hours." Kyle looked ahead. The forest seemed denser than it had an hour ago, darker somehow, though the sun hadn't fully set. Still, something shimmered through the tree line, just barely visible through the trunks. "I see something," he said quietly. They pushed forward. As they came closer, the trees parted in a way that felt unnatural, like they were being guided toward it. And there it was. A cabin. Old, weather-worn logs made up its walls. Its roof sagged slightly, blanketed in a layer of rotting leaves. The windows were blackened, not by curtains, but by something much thicker, like they had been painted from the inside. A rusted metal lantern hung crookedly by the door, swaying without wind. "Dude," Mason whispered, "this isn't on the map." Kyle stepped forward, phone in hand, recording. "Then we found something no one else has." As they approached, the camera shook slightly in Kyle's hands. Knock. They both froze. The knock hadn't come from the front. It had come from the side wall. 3 steady, deliberate thuds. Kyle looked at Mason, eyes wide. "I thought it was abandoned." Mason didn't respond. He was staring at the blackened window. And behind the grime, a shape moved. Mason took a slow step back, his boot crunching on a fallen branch. The sound was deafening in the silence that followed the knock. Kyle kept recording, the screen trembling in his hands now. Not from movement, but from something colder creeping into his bones. "I swear something moved," Mason whispered, eyes locked on the window. Kyle zoomed in on the glass. At first, there was nothing. Just layers of grime and moisture, streaked as if something inside had dragged fingers down the pane. But then, just before Kyle lowered the phone, something shifted again, quick, like a blink. A pale, narrow face barely visible in the dark. No details, just an outline. "Watching. We should go," Mason muttered, turning. Creak. The front door opened a few inches on its own. No wind. No one in sight. It groaned like it hadn't moved in years, revealing nothing but pitch blackness inside. Kyle's heart hammered. His breath came out in clouds now, even though the air wasn't cold enough for it. Mason turned back, frozen in place. Did you do that?" Kyle shook his head. "I didn't touch anything." A new sound floated out from inside the cabin. A whisper. Soft. Indistinct. Like words being spoken underwater. Kyle stepped forward, as if pulled. The phone was still recording. The screen glitched for a brief moment, green lines flickering across it. Inside the doorway, something hung from the ceiling. Rope? No, string. Strings, dozens of them, like webs, with small bells tied to each end. Not a sound came from them. "I think someone lives here," Mason said, voice cracking. Then something knocked again. But this time, it came from inside the phone. From the speaker. Tap. 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 Kyle dropped it. The phone hit the ground face first, the screen flickering once before settling into a black reflection of the trees above. Kyle didn't reach for it. He couldn't. His feet felt rooted, like the forest had swallowed his instinct to run. Mason slowly knelt down, picked it up. The screen lit up again, only now the recording was gone. The video app had closed. The camera was locked. Mason tapped it. Nothing responded. It's like something inside the phone just knocked back, he muttered, voice shaking. Kyle didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the doorway. The interior of the cabin was unnaturally dark. It wasn't the absence of light, it was thicker than that, like the air itself had weight. The string still hung motionless. But now one of the bells was missing. Did you hear that whisper again? Kyle asked quietly. No, Mason said, swallowing. But I think it's closer now. As if on cue, another knock came. Not from the wall this time. Not from the phone. From a tree. Behind them. They spun. Just 20 feet back, on a wide birch tree, were markings. Deep carvings, old and blackened, but fresh blood was dripping from the grooves. 3 parallel lines, vertical, almost like claw marks but spaced too evenly. Kyle slowly raised his phone again. The camera turned on this time. But as he pointed it toward the markings, a face blinked onto the screen for half a second. It wasn't in front of them. It was behind them. They turned around fast, breath held. Nothing. Just forest. Just silence. But now the cabin door was wide open. And the whisper had become breathing. The breathing wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable, slow, deliberate, and wet. Not the kind of breath from someone hiding, but from something waiting. Listening. Kyle tightened his grip on the phone. It was still recording now, the red circle blinking silently on screen. Mason's hand instinctively moved to his pocketknife, though neither of them had any illusion it would help. What if someone's inside? Mason whispered, his voice cracking. Kyle shook his head. Then why haven't they said anything? They took a step toward the cabin. The breath grew softer, as if retreating deeper inside. Kyle leaned closer to the doorway, squinting. The strings with the bells were gone now. Completely. No sign they'd ever been there. The floorboards inside were soaked, as if something had recently melted or bled across the wood. He raised the phone and pointed it inward. On the screen, total black. But then the audio spiked. A woman's voice. Clear. Calm. Almost melodic. Why are you still here? Mason stumbled back, eyes wide. Did you hear that? Kyle nodded, pale. He didn't answer, his screen had just flickered again. This time, frames from past moments began appearing. The knock. The face. A white hand pressing against the glass. All glitching in reverse, like the camera was rewinding time on its own. Then it stopped. The screen froze on an image neither of them had taken. A photo of the two of them, standing just outside the cabin. But the picture had been taken from inside. From behind the window. And in the bottom corner, a hand was visible, long and gray, pressing against the glass. Neither of them had seen it. Kyle lowered the phone slowly. We need to go. But Mason was already looking past him, toward the tree line again. His lips barely moved. There's someone standing there. Kyle turned slowly, every muscle in his body stiff with dread. At first, he didn't see it. Just trees, windless and still. But then his eyes adjusted, and there it was. A figure. Far enough away to blur the details, but close enough to see the shape, tall, thin, unmoving. Not swaying like the branches. Not breathing. Just watching. Its head was slightly tilted. Its arms hung too low. It didn't belong. Kyle took a step back. We're leaving. Now. Mason didn't move. Kyle, he whispered, there's another one. He pointed left. Another figure. Then a third, barely visible through the trees. 3 shapes. All still. All facing them. Don't run, Kyle muttered. Just walk. But the forest had changed. Somehow, the way they came in, the narrow opening in the trees, was gone. Replaced by thick underbrush and trunks pressed so tightly together it looked unnatural. As if the forest had closed behind them. The door to the cabin creaked again behind them. They turned. Now the figure that had been in the tree line, was standing in the doorway. It hadn't walked. There had been no sound. It was just there. Still tilted head. Arms brushing the floor. No face. Just a stretched outline where one should be. Kyle stumbled back, breath catching in his throat. Mason grabbed his arm, voice rising. Go. Now. They turned and pushed into the woods blindly, branches scraping their arms and necks. The shadows grew deeper with every step. The breathing sound, no longer behind them. It was everywhere. The forest was alive. And it was closing in. Behind them, they heard the soft chime of a single bell. The same one that had vanished from the strings. And then... whispers. Right behind their ears. The whispers weren't words anymore, just sounds that resembled language. Soft, curling tones, like someone was mimicking speech without understanding it. Mason clutched his head, stumbling through the brush, as if the sound was pressing against his skull. "They're inside my ears," he gasped. "They're not following us, they're already here." Kyle didn't respond. He couldn't. Every direction looked the same, just trees, roots, and the suffocating darkness that seemed to bend around them. His phone was still recording, the battery somehow untouched. But now the timer on the screen was counting backward. 00:13:46. 00:13:45. What the hell, Kyle muttered, staring. A sharp pain stung his wrist. He looked down. A single black string was wrapped around his arm. Thin, silk-like, and pulsing, tugging him gently back toward the direction of the cabin. He yanked it free with a cry, and the strand dissolved into ash between his fingers. Mason was hyperventilating now. "I saw its face," he said. "Just for a second. It didn't have eyes, it had..." He stopped, shivering. "It knew me." A new sound cracked through the forest. Not a whisper. Not breathing. Laughter. Childlike, echoing through the trees. But warped, like a recording played backward. And layered beneath it, the faint sound of footsteps. Dozens. Running in circles. Kyle raised his phone again, pointed blindly into the dark. The screen flickered, then went black. And then an image appeared. The cabin. Except now, they were inside it. A photo. Taken from behind them. Both standing in the cabin doorway. Except, they had never gone in. And in the reflection of the glass. That tall, faceless figure was standing between them. Kyle dropped the phone again, this time, the screen cracked as it hit a root. The image stayed frozen, the two of them standing in the cabin's doorway with that thing behind them. But they hadn't been there. They hadn't. Mason was on his knees now, hands clutched over his ears. His body trembled violently. "It's copying us," he whispered. "It's showing us what it wants to happen. Or maybe what's already happened." Kyle reached for his friend, but stopped. Behind Mason, a shape was forming. Like mist condensing into a figure. Slowly, deliberately. An arm took form first, long, wrong, bending at the middle. Then the outline of shoulders. A head with no features. No sound. Just motion. And as it formed fully, it tilted its head, the same way the figure by the cabin had. Identical. Precise. "Mason," Kyle choked, barely above a breath, "get up. Now. But Mason didn't move. The thing's arm began to lift, slowly, like a puppet being pulled by unseen strings. Kyle lunged forward and grabbed his friend, pulling him to his feet. Mason blinked, dazed. "What's happening?" "It was behind you," Kyle said. "Don't turn around. Just run." They ran again. This time the forest shifted differently. Not just closing, but repeating. Trees they'd seen already. A rotting stump. A crooked birch with symbols carved into it. Over and over. Looping. As if the woods weren't letting them go, because they had never really entered. A sudden ringing exploded in Kyle's ears, sharp, piercing. A bell. Then another. And another. From every direction. Thousands of them. And beneath the ringing, the woman's voice again. "Closer now. Why are you still here?" And then, whispering laughter. Right next to his ear. Kyle stumbled, his balance shredded by the shrill sound of bells crashing against one another in perfect, chaotic rhythm. It wasn't just noise, it was invasive, drilling into the soft parts of his brain. He grabbed a tree for balance, but the bark peeled under his hand like dead skin. Mason clutched his stomach and fell to his knees. "I can't breathe," he gasped. "It's inside me. Something's inside." Kyle knelt beside him, trying to help, but froze when he saw it. A thin, black string snaking up from the soil beneath Mason's knee. It had already wrapped around his wrist, and was tightening. "Mason, get up!" Kyle shouted, tugging the string, but it resisted, stretching like wet leather, pulling Mason toward the ground. A whisper coiled into the space between them. "One of you may leave." It didn't come from a direction. It came from everywhere. Mason's eyes locked with Kyle's. He looked pale. Hollow. "You go," he said, almost too calmly. "It wants one of us. Maybe that's the deal. I'm not leaving you." But the forest shifted again. With a sickening lurch, the trees parted, revealing the cabin, directly in front of them again. They hadn't been running in circles. The woods were bringing them back. Kyle stood, panting, trembling. The door was open. Lights were now glowing dimly inside. A long hallway that hadn't existed before stretched back into the darkness, and at the far end, a woman stood in a white dress. She didn't move. Didn't blink. She only stared. Kyle turned to Mason, only to find him gone. No noise. No sign. Only the string, now retracted into the soil. And the woman's voice, clear, final, echoing through the trees. "It's your turn now." Kyle froze. The silence that followed Mason's disappearance was absolute. So total it felt fake. The wind had stopped. No birds. No creaking branches. Even the sound of his own breath felt like it was being swallowed by the trees. Only the soft hum of light remained, the glow spilling from the cabin's open doorway. That impossible hallway still stretched inside, flickering slightly at the edges, as if reality itself was glitching. The woman was still there. Unmoving. Her dress didn't shift. Her hair didn't sway. It was like she wasn't actually part of this world, but superimposed over it, a projection of something older, something deeper. Kyle backed away, but the forest behind him was now a wall of black. Not darkness. Just nothing. No trees. No ground. Like the world had ended at the cabin's edge. He was boxed in. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. It had restarted. But now it had only one app on the screen. No icons. No clock. Just one title in red text. Replay. Hands shaking, Kyle tapped it. The screen lit up with a video. The cabin hallway, shot from the inside. The woman walking toward the camera. Slowly. Gracefully. But something was off. As she moved closer, the hallway behind her kept stretching, like the footage was being edited in real time. The walls grew taller. The lights dimmed. Shadows pulsed behind her, twitching as if alive. The woman stopped. Stared into the camera. Into Kyle. And then, she smiled. Not with her mouth. With her eyes. His phone dropped from his hand again, as if rejecting what it had shown. And when he looked up, she was no longer in the hallway. She was at the doorway. Closer. Kyle took an involuntary step back, but there was nowhere to go. Behind him, the void remained, a pitch-black wall of non-reality where the forest had been. In front of him, the woman now stood fully within the doorway, the light behind her flickering like a dying projector. She was taller than before. Or maybe she had always been that tall, and now he was only noticing. Her skin looked almost translucent up close, as if light passed through her in places it shouldn't. Her eyes weren't eyes. They were reflections. Like mirrors. But they didn't reflect him, they reflected the cabin interior, twisted and inverted, a place that hadn't happened yet. She raised her hand and beckoned. Just one motion. Kyle's legs moved on their own. No, he whispered, trying to resist, but it was like walking through molasses, every step unnatural, pulled forward by something under his skin. The air thickened as he crossed the threshold. Inside. The door slammed behind him. Instant blackness swallowed him whole. No light. No sound. No floor beneath his feet. Just, falling. And then. A thud. He landed hard on a dusty wooden floor. Gasping, coughing, Kyle looked around. He was inside the cabin. But not the one from before. This one was clean. Pristine. Candlelit. Portraits lined the walls, black and white photographs of people. Hundreds of them. All of them staring into the lens. All of them, afraid. He stood, dazed. On the wall directly across from him, an old, gold-framed mirror hung crookedly. Kyle approached it slowly. In the reflection, himself. And standing directly behind him, her. But when he turned, no one. The room was empty. Except for the sound. A faint knock, from the mirror. The knock echoed inside the room, sharp and hollow, not from glass, but from somewhere behind the mirror. Kyle stared, frozen, watching his own pale reflection. He barely recognized himself, sweat-streaked, eyes wild, pupils dilated. The mirror seemed deeper than it should have been, like looking through a window, not at a surface. Another knock. Then, a whisper. Soft. Childlike. "Let me out." Kyle stepped back. A crack appeared in the mirror's lower corner, subtle at first, like a hairline fracture. Then, with a dry snap, it spread upward like a jagged branch. From inside, faint movement. Not a reflection. An actual figure, curled up behind the glass. Something was trapped. Thin hands. A face half hidden in shadow. The lips moved silently. He couldn't look away. The lights in the cabin dimmed suddenly, every candle flickering in unison. The portraits on the wall, all of them, had changed. No longer terrified. Now every single face was smiling. Wide, unnatural grins stretched across pale lips, eyes glowing slightly, like something else had taken residence behind them. Kyle turned in a panic, but the door he entered through was gone. No seams in the wood. No hinges. Just wall. And then he heard it. The bell. The same tone as before, but now slowed down, dragged out like a death knell. Ding. 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 From behind the mirror, the figure pressed its hands against the glass. Skin pale gray. Fingers too long. And then, eyes opened. Not human eyes. Eyes that remembered him. Eyes he had seen in the forest. And then the voice came again, clearer now, deep and ancient. You've already been here. And the mirror began to pull him in. The mirror's surface rippled like liquid mercury, softening, stretching toward him as if breathing. Kyle's legs refused to move. His body trembled violently, but his feet remained rooted to the floor. A pressure, like invisible hands, pressed against his chest, gently at first, then harder. He tried to scream, but the air around him had thickened. No sound escaped. From within the mirror, the creature's mouth opened slowly, impossibly wide. No tongue. No teeth. Just darkness, pouring outward like smoke underwater. It slithered out in tendrils, thin and searching, licking across the surface of the glass and reaching for him. One of them touched his arm. It was cold at first, then blistering hot. Kyle gasped and finally stumbled backward, breaking the contact. His skin sizzled, an angry red welt now spread down his forearm, shaped like a hand. But the tendrils didn't stop. They reached again, moving faster, eager now. He turned and ran. No door. No window. But down the hallway. Impossibly long, stretching farther than the cabin could ever contain. He ran, feet slamming against the wooden floor, shadows pulsing alongside him. The hallway twisted, warped, walls bending inward, doorways flashing past, some open to other places, a foggy hospital room, a submerged staircase, a child's bedroom with no child but something breathing under the bed. He didn't look. Just ran. The bell was ringing behind him again, faster now. Ding 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 ding. And then, without warning, he burst through a final door. And found himself outside. Night. Forest. Silence. He spun around, the cabin was behind him. Still there. Still intact. But no lights. No door. Just a wall of old wood, and one cracked mirror, nailed to the outside. Kyle stared at it, panting. In the mirror's reflection, himself. Alone. Until, slowly, a second shape appeared behind him. Mason. Smiling. Kyle spun around with a burst of hope, Mason. But no one was there. Just the forest. Silent. Breathless. He turned back to the mirror. Mason's reflection was still standing there, behind him. Close. Too close. But the real world remained empty. Kyle took a trembling step back, eyes darting between the woods and the cracked mirror. The reflection hadn't changed. Mason was still smiling, that unnatural, frozen grin locked onto Kyle's image. And then Mason raised his hand. Kyle didn't move. But in the reflection, he did. His reflection turned toward Mason, nodded slowly, and walked into the cabin. Kyle stumbled back. "No, that's not me," he whispered. The mirror shimmered again. Now inside it, both Kyle and Mason stood side by side. The hallway behind them stretched endlessly once more. The same candles. The same portraits. Except now, his reflection was smiling too. A perfect match. Kyle's real face twisted in horror. "That's not me. That's not." The mirror cracked again. Not like before. This time it shattered outward, as if something had punched from within. Glass flew in every direction, but Kyle wasn't cut. He wasn't even touched. Because there was no glass. Only another version of him, now standing where the mirror had been. Same clothes. Same face. But the eyes. The eyes were black. Empty. And smiling. Don't worry, the reflection whispered in Kyle's voice. You're already inside. I'm just here to finish it. Kyle's body locked up, he couldn't speak, couldn't scream. The thing in front of him, the copy, stepped closer, its boots crunching over the shards of mirror that weren't really there anymore. Each footfall felt like it echoed inside Kyle's head. The forest didn't move. The trees didn't sway. Time felt suspended. The double tilted its head, the same way the faceless figures in the woods had. A perfect, unnatural mimicry. You've been wandering in here for hours, it said. Or was it days? It grinned wider. The woods don't tell time. Kyle finally found his voice. What do you want? The reflection chuckled softly. But it wasn't just him laughing now. The laughter came from behind every tree. From below the earth. From inside Kyle's own chest. What do you think? The double whispered. I'm the part you left behind. The part you ignored. The one who said let's go back, when Mason heard the knock. A flash of memory hit Kyle, Mason, standing by the window, the breath fogging the glass, that first knock. The unease. The moment he should have listened. You left the door open, the reflection said. We came through. And then it raised its hand. Kyle braced himself, ready to run, fight, scream, but instead, the double pointed toward the cabin. It had returned. Lights on. Door open. And now, music was playing. A faint, distant piano. Notes that should have been comforting, but were twisted, off-key, looping the same few bars again and again. Kyle turned back. But his double was gone. Only the forest remained. And the cabin, waiting. Kyle didn't want to move, but something was pulling him. Not physically. Not even mentally. It was deeper than that. Like the music was stitched into the back of his brain, tugging on nerves that had no name. Each note of that broken piano melody dragged him closer to the glowing doorway, step by reluctant step. Leaves crunched beneath his feet. The air grew colder again, not natural cold, but the kind that hums just beneath the skin, as if his body recognized something ancient was near. He stopped at the cabin entrance. The piano music echoed softly from within, echoing off invisible walls. The same hallway stretched again, impossibly long, pulsing at the edges like a dying heartbeat. Kyle whispered Mason's name. No answer. Only the music. Then, a voice, one he hadn't heard in years. Come in, sweetheart. His mother's voice. She had died when he was 14. Kyle's legs nearly gave out. The voice came again, gentler. You left the door open. He stepped inside. The light didn't flicker this time. It glowed warm and steady. The hallway no longer looked infinite, it looked like home. Wooden picture frames hung neatly. Carpet beneath his feet. The smell of old books and lemon cleaner. And at the far end, the living room from his childhood. His mother sat in her old chair, knitting something red. Mom, he said, barely audible. She looked up and smiled, but her eyes were wrong. Too wide. Too dark. Too empty. Kyle took another step forward. And the carpet beneath his feet rippled. It wasn't fabric. It was skin. Kyle froze mid-step, staring down in disbelief. The soft texture under his boots, which he had taken for carpet, twitched, as if muscles flexed beneath it. Fine hairs rose from the surface like goosebumps. And then, just below his foot, a pulse throbbed once, slow and wet, as though a massive vein had pumped something beneath the surface. He stumbled backward. The hallway was already gone. In its place. Walls made of stitched flesh, twitching and alive, pulsing in rhythm with some unseen, monstrous heart. His mother still sat at the far end. Still smiling. still knitting. But now, the red yarn wasn't yarn. It was vein, long and sinewy, stretching out of something behind the chair, slithering down the hallway, disappearing into the floor. The thing behind her groaned, low and wet, like the sound of something waking up after centuries of sleep. Kyle shook his head violently. No. No, this isn't real. His mother rose, slowly, still holding the red strand. As she stood, her shadow stretched, longer than it should have, warping against the pulsing walls. Her neck cracked sideways, and her smile widened unnaturally. "You came back, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice a chorus now, not one voice, but many. Familiar ones. Mason's. His own. Others he didn't recognize. "You never left." From the floor beneath him, dozens of hands began pushing through the living carpet. Thin, pale fingers clawing up, grasping at his ankles. Whispers rose with them. "Join us. Remember. There's only inside now." Kyle screamed and turned, sprinting blindly into the pulsing dark. But the cabin didn't end. It only rearranged. The walls shifted with each step, reshaping, bending, stretching. He wasn't escaping. He was being guided. And behind him, the piano began playing again. This time, the melody sounded almost like a lullaby. Kyle ran until his lungs burned, but the air was heavy, syrupy, each breath like inhaling dust and fog. The hallway warped as he moved, bending at impossible angles. Sometimes it turned sideways, and for a brief, nauseating second, he found himself running on the wall, then on the ceiling, then back on the floor without ever changing direction. He stopped. He had to. His body screamed at him to collapse, to give in to the weight pressing down on his chest. But the moment he paused, the cabin responded. The walls exhaled. A long, guttural breath echoed around him, not through air, but through the structure itself. Like the place was alive. And then he heard it again. The bells. Only this time, there were hundreds. Thousands. A sea of soft ringing, all around him. And rising beneath the chime, footsteps. They were coming. Slow. Deliberate. Dragging. Kyle looked around, desperate for a way out. One of the walls pulsed, a line opened in the flesh like a mouth splitting down the middle. Beyond it, a staircase spiraled downward into a red glow. Like the color of blood in candlelight. He didn't want to go down. But the footsteps were getting closer. And then a sound froze him in place. Mason. Screaming. From below. From the red. Kyle clenched his fists and ran toward the stairs, not because he trusted what was down there, but because something real was down there. His friend. He descended fast. The staircase felt infinite. Each step squished beneath his feet. The walls tightened as he moved deeper, brushing against his shoulders, then his arms, then his ribs, until he had to hunch and slide sideways through the narrowing spiral. Then, it opened again. Into a room. Round. Enormous. Like the belly of something dead. At the center, a mirror. Cracked. Shaking. And in it. Mason. Mason stood within the mirror, frozen mid-scream. His hands were pressed against the inside of the glass, knuckles white, lips contorted into a silent howl. His eyes, they were alive. Moving. Desperate. They darted back and forth, trying to lock onto Kyle. But the mirror didn't reflect the room Kyle was standing in. It showed somewhere else. A dark, colorless void behind Mason. Faint shapes moved there, tall, thin, barely human. They circled him slowly, dragging limbs behind them, their mouths yawning open in unnatural ways, but never making a sound. Kyle stepped forward. "Mason," he yelled. No reaction. The glass rippled, but didn't break. Kyle's reflection was gone from the surface. Only Mason existed there now. And beneath the mirror, carved into the floor in strange looping symbols, was a line of text, crude, burned into the wood. Only those left behind may leave. Kyle stared at the words, pulse hammering in his ears. Behind him, the stairs sealed shut. A thick slab of flesh closed the spiral completely. No going back. Only forward. The mirror flickered. Mason's eyes locked with Kyle's. And for the first time, Mason spoke. But his lips didn't move in the mirror. The words came inside Kyle's head. It's not a place. It's a decision. Suddenly, Mason began to sink into the mirror, like it had become liquid, swallowing him from the feet upward. His scream returned, shrill and terrible, echoing in the chamber. Kyle rushed forward and grabbed the glass. It was ice cold. And soft. His hand began to sink in. He could go after him. But the moment his skin passed through, the voices returned. Thousands, shrieking into his skull. Trade. 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 Only one leaves. Kyle's hand trembled inside the mirror's cold surface, now sunk past his wrist. Mason was almost fully submerged, only his face visible, screaming without sound, eyes full of terror and pleading. That final sliver of him hovered just beneath the liquid surface, just barely within reach. Kyle's fingers brushed Mason's. And the moment they touched, the cabin screamed. Not a sound. Not a vibration. A scream of thought. A psychic detonation of every voice that had ever whispered in those halls, all crying out at once, begging, warning, laughing. Only one may leave. The mirror pulled harder. Now it wanted Kyle. The flesh-like floor beneath him writhed and cracked. Pale arms, hundreds of them, erupted from the wood, grabbing his ankles, his waist, pulling him down. The mirror wasn't a window. It was a mouth. It wanted to swallow him. He had to choose. Mason or himself. Stay or go. Kyle clenched his jaw. Tears ran down his face as he tightened his grip on Mason's fading form. The arms pulled harder. The voices screamed louder. And then, he yanked Mason forward with all his strength. The mirror shattered into light. White. Blinding. Weightless. He awoke gasping, sprawled out on the ground in the middle of the forest clearing. It was daylight. The cabin was gone. No walls. No doorway. No mirror. Just moss, wind, and sunlight streaming through the trees. Mason lay a few feet away, unconscious but breathing. Kyle crawled over and shook him. Mason. Mason, wake up. His eyes fluttered open. He looked at Kyle. And smiled. Thanks for letting me out, he whispered. But the voice wasn't Mason's. Kyle's blood ran cold. That voice, it wore Mason's tone like a mask, but the texture of it was wrong. It was too calm, too smooth, like someone remembering how to speak. Mason's eyes held his gaze, too long. No blinking. No confusion. Just stillness. Kyle took a step back. Mason? He asked quietly. The thing on the ground sat up, slowly. Movement stiff, unnatural, like the joints were adjusting to a body that didn't quite fit. It tilted its head. That same tilt he'd seen in the forest. In the mirror. In the others. You shouldn't have pulled him out, it said. Kyle's heart thundered. You're not him. No, the thing said. I'm what comes after. Behind it, the wind shifted, and the trees no longer looked the same. The forest wasn't the one they'd entered. The moss was the wrong color. The sky above shimmered faintly, like something watched from the other side of it. Kyle turned in a slow circle. They were back in the woods, but not in the same world. Something had changed. The thing wearing Mason stood now, arms hanging too low again. "You made the trade," it said. Kyle shook his head. "I saved him." The smile widened. "You saved something." Suddenly, a rustling from the tree lean. A figure emerged. Another Mason. Torn shirt. Blood down his cheek. Barefoot. He looked around wildly, saw Kyle. "Run," he screamed. Kyle spun around. The first Mason was gone. No trace. Only silence. And Kyle realized. He hadn't saved Mason. He'd let them both out. And one of them wasn't real. Kyle's breath hitched in his throat. Two Masons. One running toward him in panic, eyes wide with terror. The other, the one that had smiled, that had thanked him, was gone. Melted back into the trees. Or hiding somewhere nearby. The Mason in front of him dropped to his knees. "It tricked you, didn't it?" he gasped. "It pulled my voice, my face. It used me." Kyle staggered back. His mind reeled. "But, how do I know you're real?" Mason clutched Kyle's arms. "Remember the sound the mirror made when it cracked the first time? You told me it sounded like frozen branches. I never said it out loud. Only you said that." Kyle froze. It was true. He had whispered that description in the hallway before the mirror ever pulled him in. This Mason had heard it. Only the real one could have. But something still didn't sit right. Because the trees around them had gone silent again. And the sky overhead no longer moved. No breeze. No clouds. No time. They weren't out. They were in another layer. A quieter one. A more patient one. Mason looked up suddenly, eyes widening in horror. "Kyle, your shadow." Kyle turned his head slowly. The sun above them shined from the east. Mason had a shadow behind him. Kyle did not. He stood. Light cast no shape. No edge. No darkness. Nothing. Mason began to crawl backward. "I don't think you came out either," he whispered. Kyle looked down at his hands. They were beginning to flicker. And far behind the trees. The cabin was rebuilding itself. Kyle stared at his hands as they shimmered and pulsed, flickering like bad video footage. Bits of static bled into his fingertips, fracturing the edges of his form. His breath came in sharp, hollow gasps, not from exhaustion, but from something missing inside him. Something vital. Mason stood, trembling. "You didn't escape." Kyle's voice cracked. "But I pulled you out." Mason's eyes filled with tears. "No. You traded places." Behind them, the wind returned, but it wasn't natural. It moved in circles, spiraling around them, whispering as it passed. Not voices, pieces of voices. Fragments. Like someone flipping through dying radio stations. "You're not supposed to be out. You're what watches now. The inside remembers." Kyle fell to his knees, gripping his chest. He couldn't feel his heartbeat. Couldn't feel weight in his limbs. He looked to Mason, but Mason had stepped back again, face pale. "You're not fading," Mason whispered. "You're transforming." And Kyle felt it. The flicker was stabilizing, but not in a human way. He was becoming thin. Tall. His limbs itched, bones stretching, fingers lengthening. Memories slipped through his mind like sand through broken glass. His childhood. His first day of school. His brother's laugh. His face. All of it, draining away. Something else was filling him instead. The whisper of the hallway. The cold of the mirror. The hunger of the cabin. He turned toward the trees, and in the distance, the cabin stood again. Whole. Clean. Waiting. And deep inside, through a window, he saw someone else approaching. Another visitor. Another younger version of himself. Curious. Naive. Unaware. The cycle was ready to begin again. And this time, Kyle would be waiting inside. Kyle rose to his feet. But he wasn't Kyle anymore. Not exactly. His mind was still there, buried beneath new thoughts, foreign instincts, hungers that didn't belong to a human body. His muscles no longer strained. His breathing no longer labored. The air bent around him, as if space itself knew to stay away. Mason stood frozen a few feet away, eyes wide, fists clenched, torn between fleeing and trying to help. Kyle, he whispered. But the name didn't fit anymore. The thing standing before him was taller now. Shoulders unnaturally rigid. Skin graying, stretching too tightly over shifting bones. Its head twitched occasionally, as if recalibrating to a new kind of balance. And when it looked at Mason, it smiled. But not with emotion. With purpose. "You should run," the thing said in Kyle's voice. "But you won't." Mason turned and bolted. The forest tried to move with him, to trap him again, but something had changed. The rules weren't the same anymore. Kyle. Or what wore Kyle's shape, stayed still, watching. Observing. Learning. It didn't need to chase. Because the cabin would bring Mason back. It always did. The ritual was complete. One must enter. One must remain. One must return wearing the memory of the other. A wind rushed through the trees, and in the air, strings began to appear again, black threads weaving themselves between branches, rattling with tiny, rusted bells. They sang a quiet, sorrowful chime. The forest was resetting. Preparing. And inside the cabin, through the flickering glass of the mirror, a new face began to take form. Terrified. Curious. Just like Kyle had once been. Somewhere far beyond the edge of the forest, a boy adjusted the straps of his camera bag. His name was Elijah. 16. Adventurous. Naive. He had heard stories, a thread on a forgotten message board, a strange GPS coordinate someone had claimed, would take you somewhere the map doesn't follow. He didn't believe in that kind of thing, but the post had stuck with him. Especially the part that said, "You'll know you found it when the forest goes quiet, and the trees seem to lean inward to listen." He had smiled when he read it. He wasn't smiling now. The forest around him had gone silent. And the trees really did look like they were listening. He stopped, pulling out his phone. No signal. The compass app spun uselessly. But something pulled at him. Not physically. More like a suggestion. A feeling in his chest that the next step would reveal something important. And then, through the trees. A clearing. And at the center of it, the cabin. Weather-worn. Still. Its window blackened. Its door slightly ajar. Elijah hesitated. He almost turned back. But then something in the window moved. A flicker. A face. Too fast to see clearly. And he heard a knock. 3 slow thuds, echoing through the trees like a memory played backward. Inside the cabin, in the deepest, coldest corner of the mirror, Kyle stirred. What was left of him twitched to life. The strings above began to hum. The bells rang softly. And a voice whispered through the roots of the trees. "The door is open again." Elijah stepped into the clearing, boots crunching on the brittle grass. The air felt wrong. Not cold. Not heavy. Just thin, as though sound and breath might fall through it if he wasn't careful. The cabin loomed before him, slouched in the earth like it had been waiting forever. Its wood was old but untouched by time, no rot, no moss. Just darkened boards and that slightly open door. Inside, the shadows shifted. Elijah swallowed hard. He was brave, stupid brave, as his sister used to say. But this place didn't feel like something you dared. It felt like something you survived. Still, he stepped forward. The door opened the rest of the way on its own. Slowly, creaking not with rust, but like it had been whispering to itself for years and finally wanted to be heard. Elijah raised his phone and turned on the flashlight. Nothing. Just a long, dim hallway. He stepped in. Inside the mirror, Kyle blinked. Not physically. Not anymore. But something deeper, a twitch of awareness, like a thought rising through layers of sleep. The mirror rippled. The cabin recognized Elijah. It remembered the beginning. A new arrival meant a new exchange. Kyle's reflection shifted. He saw the hallway through the glass. He saw Elijah take his first steps inside. The bells above the door chimed once, clear and deliberate. A warning. A welcome. A seal. And somewhere deep in the cabin walls, the voice began again. One may enter. One must remain. One will return wearing the other. Kyle's hands pressed against the inside of the glass. He didn't know if he was trying to escape. Or reach out to welcome Elijah in. Elijah's flashlight barely pierced the hallway's darkness. The beam stretched out ahead of him but seemed to get absorbed, as though the shadows weren't simply dark, they were hungry. The air was dry, wooden, but underneath it he caught a scent he couldn't place, something metallic, and old. Like wet coins in a locked box. Each step made the floor groan faintly, not like creaking wood, but more like breathing. He paused. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly ajar. Light flickered underneath it, not from a bulb, not from fire. Something in between, a pale glow that made his stomach churn. Like light that had never touched anything living. Behind him, the cabin door clicked shut. Elijah spun. Nothing. Just the door. Closed now. He tried the handle. It didn't budge. He was inside. In the mirror, Kyle saw it all. He no longer moved like a person, but he understood. Memory was scattered inside him, like shattered glass, but it was all still there. Mason. The strings. The mirror. The trade. He watched Elijah approach the door, the same door he had once opened. But this time, the hallway was different. Longer. Deeper. Because the cabin grows with each memory it consumes. Kyle pressed his hand to the inside of the glass. And to his surprise, Elijah turned and looked directly into the mirror. Not at the wall. At Kyle. As if he could see him. They locked eyes. And for a moment, Kyle felt it. A chance. A choice. Elijah reached for the doorknob at the end of the hallway. Kyle's hand curled into a fist behind the glass. Don't. Don't do it. But Elijah turned the knob. The door creaked open. And the whispering began again. The door opened inward, slowly, reluctantly, as if the cabin itself was unsure whether Elijah should pass. The room beyond was circular and dimly lit. Walls lined with ancient, black-stained wood, floor scabbed with something cracked and sticky beneath the varnish. In the center stood a mirror. Tall, crooked, spiderwebbed with fractures that pulsed faintly with a reddish glow. Elijah stepped inside. Behind him, the door vanished. No hinges. No seam. Just wall. He was alone. Or so he thought. Inside the mirror, Kyle's breath hitched, not out of fear, but hope. He pressed both palms against the glass, leaning closer. Elijah was now just a few feet away, staring directly at the surface. Kyle could see the confusion in his eyes. That mix of wonder and unease. Kyle had worn that same look once. He wanted to warn him, scream, break through. But he couldn't. The rules held. One may enter. One must remain. One. Elijah reached out and touched the mirror. His fingers sank in slightly. The surface pulsed, as though it had just taken its first breath in years. The room groaned. The lights dimmed. From above, a faint jingling. The strings had returned. Black threads, descending from nowhere, drifting just overhead, each with a single rusted bell at the end, still, waiting. Kyle banged against the glass, mouth open in a silent shout. Not him. Not again. Please not again. But Elijah leaned closer. His reflection began to blur. Then, it split. Two Elijahs. One still staring forward. The other inside the mirror now. Eyes wide. Mouth open. And behind that version, something rose from the shadows. Tall. Faceless. Watching. Elijah staggered back from the mirror, his hand slick with cold that wasn't wet. His breathing turned sharp, rapid. The image he'd just seen, two of himself, one inside, one outside, and that thing behind the one trapped inside. He wiped his palm on his jacket, but the cold stayed. Inside the mirror, the second Elijah remained. Still. Terrified. And behind him, that presence loomed larger now. It didn't move, not fully, it shimmered, like something half-dreamed, half-remembered. Limbs too long. A body that bent in ways it shouldn't. A head that tilted slowly, precisely. And then, it turned toward Kyle. Kyle jerked back from the glass. It saw him. It hadn't done that before. It had never looked directly at him. The thing pressed a pale hand to the inside of the mirror beside Elijah's shoulder. Its fingers overlapped Kyle's. The surface quivered, like it was thinning. And then, it spoke. But not with sound. With pressure. With thought. This one is clever. This one remembers. Let's keep this one. The Elijah outside the mirror gasped. Suddenly, the bells rang. All at once. Hundreds. Thousands. The air buzzed with sound, not a melody, but a signal. Kyle knew what was happening. The trade. It had already begun. But this time, something was wrong. The mirror rippled and twisted, like two images trying to exist at once. Elijah outside. Elijah inside. And the thing between them. The cabin trembled. The wood groaned. The mirror cracked again, not like glass breaking. Like reality snapping. Kyle felt his body pull forward. The inside wanted him again. But so did the other side. There was no clear escape. This time, someone else had to make the decision. Elijah backed away from the mirror, heart hammering in his chest. The air around him was alive now, charged with something ancient and deliberate. The glass no longer showed a reflection. It pulled, its surface swirling like liquid smoke, folding between timelines and selves. Inside it, the second Elijah stared at him. Terrified. Confused. His lips moved, "Help me." But Elijah couldn't move. Because behind the second Elijah, the Watcher was still standing. That thing. The one that had followed Kyle. The one that remembered. And it was staring straight at Elijah now. Its hand reached out, resting gently on the shoulder of the Elijah inside. Possessive. Final. The bells above shrieked all at once. Elijah collapsed to his knees, clutching his ears as sound poured in from everywhere, voices, laughter, strings tightening in the walls, bones cracking behind the mirror's glow. Kyle, still trapped in the glass, reached forward again. He felt the rules bending. The cycle fraying. Too many trades. Too many versions. The cabin was unraveling. And this time, it wouldn't be satisfied. Unless something new was offered. The voice returned. Low. Cold. All around Elijah. Choose. Elijah looked up, eyes wide with tears. Which one will remain? On the mirror. Himself. The version already inside. Kyle. The thing. All waiting. None resisting. Because the cabin never forces. It asks. And you answer. Elijah stood, shaking. He stepped toward the glass. Take me, he whispered. And the mirror smiled. The surface shattered inward, and Elijah vanished in a blast of air, sucked into the glass like smoke pulled into a vent. The mirror went still. One reflection remained. But it wasn't Elijah. And it wasn't Kyle. It was something new. Something that had learned. And it smiled with every face it had ever worn. The forest stood still. Silent again. The cabin, at its center, faded slowly. The walls dimming like embers losing heat, the wood creaking as if exhaling one final time. With a deep, wet groan, it collapsed inward, folding into itself like a rotting flower. And then, it was gone. No wreckage. No smoke. No ash. Just the clearing. And a mirror, half buried in the dirt. Cracked. Silent. Watching. Far away, in a town that had forgotten how to remember, a new boy found an old trail. His name wasn't important. Only his curiosity was. He followed whispers through a fading path, past leaning trees and forgotten warnings. The air grew thin. The forest held its breath. And in the clearing, beneath a pale sky that didn't belong to any map, the cabin stood once more. Whole. Inviting. Waiting. Inside the mirror, something shifted. It had many faces now. Elijah. Kyle. Mason. Dozens more. Each one stacked behind the other like a deck of worn cards. And at the very back, something older. Faceless. Timeless. Still learning. Still hungry. The door creaked open. The bells gave one soft chime. And the cycle began again.